Welcome, weary South Park residents, to a gentle journey through the mountain town's most forbidden tales. Tonight, we explore the episodes that pushed boundaries so far they vanished from airwaves, creating gaps in our collective South Park memory. From religious controversies to celebrity feuds, from international incidents to network censorship, these banned episodes reveal the show's most daring moments. So, settle into your covers. Close your eyes like you're hiding from Comedy Central executives, and let us drift together through the surprisingly complex world of South Park's most controversial stories. Rest easy, and let's begin this forbidden journey. In the delicate landscape of animated satire, few controversies have revealed as much about the intersection of religious sensitivity, artistic freedom, and corporate responsibility as the complex saga surrounding the depiction of the Islamic prophet Muhammad in South Park's two-part Cartoon Wars episodes. This seemingly simple storyline about a fictional animated program's decision to show a religious figure became a profound meditation on the nature of censorship, the psychology of fear-based decision-making, and the gradual erosion of creative boundaries under the pressure of threatened violence and economic retaliation. The genesis of this controversy emerges not from South Park itself, but from the show's characteristic willingness to examine contemporary cultural phenomena through the lens of childhood innocence, encountering adult complexity. When the residents of South Park learn that Family Guy, their fictional competitor in the realm of boundary-pushing animation, plans to broadcast an image of Muhammad, the town's reaction reveals the deep anxieties that permeate American society when forced to navigate between competing values of religious respect and freedom of expression. The initial panic that grips South Park demonstrates how quickly communities can be consumed by fears that may be largely manufactured or amplified by media coverage, rather than genuine local threats. The image of an entire town flooding into the community center, abandoning their daily routines and personal responsibilities to address a perceived crisis involving a television show, speaks to the profound psychological power that media representation holds in shaping public consciousness and collective behavior. The revelation that American flags are burning in mass protests across the Middle East in response to a cartoon creates a disturbing portrait of how quickly local creative decisions can escalate into international incidents with real-world consequences for people who had no involvement in the original controversy. This escalation pattern reveals the complex web of interconnected reactions that characterize our globalized media landscape, where a single creative choice can ripple across continents and cultures in ways that the original creators never intended or anticipated. The specific nature of Family Guy's Muhammad joke, revealed as a brief and relatively innocuous tea-drinking scene, creates a stark contrast between the intensity of the reaction and the mild nature of the content that triggered it. This disproportion between cause and effect serves as a commentary on how the anticipation and fear of offense can often be more powerful and destructive than the actual offensive content itself, creating cycles of outrage that feed on themselves rather than addressing genuine grievances or concerns. Cartman's decision to travel to Los Angeles, ostensibly to protect Muslim people from offensive content, initially appears to represent a rare moment of genuine social consciousness from a character typically motivated by selfish concerns. However, the gradual revelation of his true motives, driven not by religious sensitivity, but by his personal hatred of Family Guy and his desire to see the show cancelled, demonstrates how noble-sounding causes can be hijacked by individuals with entirely different agendas who exploit legitimate concerns to achieve unrelated personal goals. Kyle's initial resistance to Cartman's plan followed by his eventual conversion to supporting censorship after experiencing his own traumatic media encounter, reveals the psychological mechanisms through which even principled individuals can be led to abandon their commitment to free expression when they personally experience the emotional impact of content that disturbs or offends them. His journey from defender of artistic freedom to advocate for censorship illustrates how personal trauma can override philosophical principles and create unexpected alliances between people who typically hold opposing viewpoints. The epic journey to Los Angeles on tricycles, covering a distance of over 1,000 miles, transforms what could have been a simple road trip narrative into an odyssey that mirrors classical tales of heroic journeys toward momentous destinations. The physical difficulty and absurdity of their chosen transportation method creates a comic counterpoint to the serious themes they're ostensibly addressing, while also suggesting that their mission may be as impractical and misguided as their choice of vehicles. The town meeting, where experts recommend literally burying heads in sand to avoid blame for Family Guy's actions, provides perhaps the most direct visual metaphor for how communities and institutions respond to controversial speech that originates within their boundaries but extends beyond their control. The image of an entire community choosing willful ignorance over engagement with difficult issues speaks to broader patterns of avoidance and denial that characterize many contemporary responses to complex cultural and political challenges. Butter's father's lone voice advocating for the defense of free speech, even at personal risk, represents the kind of principled stand that democratic societies require to maintain their commitment to open discourse and intellectual freedom. His recognition that believing in free speech while refusing to defend it represents a form of moral cowardice highlights the distinction between passive tolerance and active protection of fundamental rights, suggesting that true commitment to democratic values requires ongoing vigilance and willingness to accept uncomfortable consequences. The town's ultimate decision to choose the sand-burying option over principled resistance reveals how quickly communities can abandon their stated values when faced with the prospect of real costs or consequences for maintaining those values. This collective choice of expedience over principle demonstrates how abstract commitments to freedom and democracy can crumble when tested by practical challenges that require sacrifice or discomfort from ordinary citizens. The desert confrontation between Kyle and Cartman, where their true motivations are finally revealed, and their philosophical differences become irreconcilable, transforms their childhood friendship into a battleground for competing visions of how society should respond to controversial expression. Kyle's commitment to defending even speech he dislikes because of broader principles conflicts with Cartman's willingness to use any available excuse to silence voices he personally finds annoying or threatening. The Fox network's internal struggles with the decision whether to broadcast the controversial episode provide insight into the complex decision-making processes that govern corporate media in contemporary America. The tension between artistic integrity, advertiser concerns, legal liability, and public relations considerations creates a multi-dimensional challenge that cannot be resolved through simple appeals to principle or profit, requiring network executives to balance competing pressures that may all have legitimate claims on their attention and consideration. The Manatee Writing Room revelation serves as one of South Park's most sophisticated pieces of media criticism, suggesting that much contemporary entertainment is produced through mechanical processes that combine familiar elements in new configurations without genuine creative insight or artistic vision. The image of sea mammals randomly selecting idea balls to create television content serves as a metaphor for the formulaic and soulless nature of much commercial entertainment, while also suggesting that even nonsensical creative processes can accidentally produce content that resonates with audiences or generates controversy. The strike by the Manatee writers when the Muhammad ball is removed from their tank creates a labor relations subplot that mirrors real-world conflicts between creative workers and management over content decisions. The suggestion that the writers are unmoved by threats because they are manatees provides a darkly comic commentary on how creative independence requires a certain immunity to external pressure and coercion, whether from corporate executives, political activists, or violent extremists. Cartman's infiltration of the Fox studios and his manipulation of network executives through his Danny Pocket persona demonstrates his sophisticated understanding of how institutional decision-making can be influenced through emotional manipulation and the exploitation of bureaucratic procedures. His ability to gain access to high-level meetings and influence corporate policy through theatrical performance reveals how vulnerable large organizations can be to determined individuals who understand their internal dynamics and cultural assumptions. The climactic confrontation between Kyle and Cartman in the network offices transforms their personal conflict into a broader debate about the principles that should govern creative expression in democratic societies. Kyle's argument that pulling episodes in response to threats creates a chain reaction that ultimately destroys artistic freedom stands in direct opposition to Cartman's pragmatic willingness to sacrifice long-term principles for immediate tactical victories against content he personally opposes. The network executive's ultimate decision to allow the Family Guy episode to air uncensored represents a rare victory for principles over expedience, demonstrating that institutional courage remains possible even in environments characterized by multiple competing pressures and potential negative consequences. However, the irony that South Park itself cannot show the uncensored Muhammad image due to Comedy Central's different standards reveals how these principles are applied inconsistently across different corporate contexts and regulatory environments. The aftermath of the controversy, with its crude animated response showing various figures defecating on each other, provides a deliberately lowbrow commentary on how cultural discourse can degenerate into scatological exchanges that obscure rather than illuminate the important issues at stake. This descent into crude humor suggests that both sides of controversial debates can lose sight of their original principles when caught up in cycles of retaliation and escalation. The ultimate banning of these episodes from streaming platforms and regular rotation creates a situation where the controversy has outlasted the content that created it, with the absence of the episodes becoming more significant than their original presence. This outcome demonstrates how censorship can paradoxically increase the cultural impact of controversial content by creating forbidden fruit that gains mythical status among audiences who cannot access it through normal channels. The psychological impact of this controversy extends beyond immediate questions of religious sensitivity or artistic freedom to encompass broader issues about how democratic societies navigate competing values and manage conflicts between different constituencies with irreconcilable worldviews. The episode's exploration of these themes through the lens of childhood characters dealing with adult complexities provides a unique perspective on how cultural conflicts affect entire communities rather than just the immediate participants in controversial debates. The long-term implications of the Cartoon Wars controversy continue to influence discussions about the relationship between artistic expression and religious sensitivity, the role of corporate media in shaping cultural discourse, and the effectiveness of censorship as a tool for managing social conflict. The episode's ongoing unavailability serves as a constant reminder of the costs associated with choosing expedience over principle and the ways that short-term decisions to avoid controversy can have lasting consequences for cultural freedom and democratic discourse. In the quiet contemplation of these forbidden episodes, we recognize that the Muhammad controversy represents more than just a dispute over cartoon imagery, but rather a fundamental test of democratic society's commitment to the principles of free expression that they claim to value. The complexity of the issues raised and the various compromises made by different institutions reveal the ongoing tension between idealistic commitments to freedom and the practical challenges of maintaining social cohesion in pluralistic societies where deeply held beliefs often come into direct conflict with each other. In the complex psychology of religious recruitment and institutional manipulation, few episodes of South Park have penetrated as deeply into the mechanisms of spiritual exploitation as the infamous Trapped in the Closet, an examination of Scientology that became so controversial it was pulled from rotation and subjected to legal threats that revealed the profound power that secretive organizations can wield over media companies and creative expression. This episode represents not merely entertainment, but a form of investigative journalism disguised as animated comedy, exposing the sophisticated psychological techniques used by controversial religious movements to recruit vulnerable individuals and extract enormous sums of money from people seeking meaning and belonging in their lives. The genesis of Stan's involvement with Scientology begins with what appears to be an innocent encounter, a free personality test offered by friendly representatives who present themselves as helpers rather than recruiters. This initial contact demonstrates the sophisticated understanding that successful recruitment organizations possess about human psychology and the ways that people's natural desire for self-improvement and understanding can be weaponized against them by skilled manipulators who understand how to identify and exploit individual vulnerabilities and insecurities. The personality test itself serves as a masterclass in psychological manipulation, designed not to provide genuine insight into individual characteristics, but rather to create a sense of inadequacy and dysfunction that can only be resolved through continued involvement with the organization. The questions and evaluation criteria are carefully constructed to ensure that virtually every participant will be diagnosed with serious psychological problems that require immediate attention and ongoing treatment through Scientology's expensive and time-consuming program of spiritual development and therapeutic intervention. Stan's shocked discovery that he is supposedly riddled with psychological problems despite feeling generally content with his life demonstrates how recruitment organizations use apparent expertise in scientific-sounding terminology to convince people that their natural self-perception is unreliable and that they need external guidance to understand their true condition. This technique of undermining individual confidence in personal judgment creates psychological dependency that makes subjects more susceptible to ongoing manipulation and control by organizational authorities who claim special knowledge and insight. The immediate demand for $240 to begin addressing Stan's alleged problems reveals the commercial foundation that underlies Scientology's spiritual claims, demonstrating how organizations can exploit people's genuine spiritual seeking and psychological needs for pure financial gain. The specific amount demanded represents a significant sum for a child while remaining small enough to seem reasonable to adults who might be skeptical of larger initial investments but willing to make modest expenditures for potential psychological benefits. Stan's family's response to his depression diagnosis reveals how recruitment organizations exploit not only their direct targets, but also the social networks surrounding those individuals, using family concern and love as additional pressure points to encourage continued involvement and financial investment. His parents' immediate acceptance of the diagnosis and willingness to support his treatment demonstrate how authority figures and scientific-sounding explanations can override common sense and direct observation of a rude view person's actual mental state and behavior patterns. The tour of the Scientology facility provides insight into how organizations create environments designed to reinforce their authority and credibility, while gradually introducing increasingly bizarre and expensive concepts to people who have already invested time and money in the process. The impressive facilities, professional presentation, and confident staff create an atmosphere of legitimacy and success that makes participants more willing to accept unusual claims and continue advancing through increasingly costly levels of involvement. The introduction of L. Ron Hubbard's mythology and the E-meter device demonstrates how recruitment organizations combine pseudoscientific equipment with grandiose historical claims to create a sense of participating in something profound and high-sent, meaningful, rather than simply purchasing services from a commercial enterprise. The E-meter readings and their interpretation provide a veneer of objectivity and measurement that disguises what is essentially a subjective and manipulative process of psychological evaluation and control. Stan's identification as the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard himself represents the ultimate form of spiritual manipulation, transforming him from a customer purchasing services into a central figure whose participation validates the entire organizational structure and belief system. This elevation serves multiple psychological functions, creating intense pressure to continue involvement, while also providing the organization with a powerful recruitment and publicity tool that can be used to attract additional members and financial support. The celebrity endorsement aspect of Scientology's recruitment strategy, represented through John Travolta's appearance and obvious enthusiasm for Stan's supposed spiritual significance, demonstrates how organizations use famous adherents to provide social proof and cultural legitimacy for their claims and practices. The presence of successful and attractive individuals who attribute their achievements to organizational involvement creates powerful psychological pressure on ordinary people to emulate their example and seek similar benefits through continued participation. Tom Cruise's midnight visit to Stan's bedroom represents one of the most psychologically complex scenes in the episode, revealing the intense pressure that high-profile adherents can experience to validate their investment in controversial belief systems through successful recruitment of others. Cruise's obvious neediness and desperation for Stan's approval demonstrates how even successful individuals can become psychologically dependent on external validation of their spiritual and philosophical choices, particularly when those choices have subjected them to public ridicule and professional consequences. The famous closet metaphor that gives the episode its title operates on multiple levels simultaneously, serving as both a literal plot device and a broader commentary on the psychological dynamics of secrecy, shame, and public presentation that characterize both individual celebrity lives and organizational behavior. The image of Tom Cruise hiding in a closet while denying his location creates a powerful visual representation of the ways that public figures can become trapped by their own efforts to maintain carefully constructed public personas. Kelly's musical interjections throughout the episode provide a surreal counterpoint to the main narrative, while also serving as a commentary on how popular culture can trivialize or sensationalize serious issues through repetitive and formulaic artistic expression. The constant refrain of pulling out his gun represents the ultimate futility of trying to resolve complex psychological and social problems through violence or intimidation rather than genuine understanding and communication. The revelation of Scientology's secret doctrine about Xenu, and the Galactic Confederation represents the episode's most daring moment, taking information that the organization guards jealously and subjects to legal protection, and presenting it as the absurd science fiction narrative that it actually is. The cosmic mythology of alien civilizations, volcanic destruction, and spiritual possession reads like bad science fiction, because that is essentially what it is, revealing how supposedly profound spiritual truths can be nothing more than elaborate fantasies dressed up in religious language and presented with institutional authority. Stan's growing discomfort with his role as spiritual leader and his eventual recognition that he is being exploited demonstrates the psychological resilience that allows some individuals to resist even sophisticated manipulation techniques when they retain enough critical thinking ability to question what they are experiencing. His decision to reject his supposed spiritual significance and expose Scientology as a scam represents the kind of moral courage that is required to break free from exploitative organizations and speak truth about their practices despite potential consequences. The organization's immediate resort to legal threats when Stan challenges their authority reveals the true nature of groups that claim spiritual purpose while relying on worldly power structures to maintain their control and silence their critics. The threat of lawsuits demonstrates how organizations can use the legal system as a weapon against individuals who lack the resources to defend themselves against prolonged and expensive legal challenges, effectively silencing criticism through financial intimidation rather than addressing the substance of the accusations being made. The episode's eventual removal from regular rotation following legal pressure from Scientology demonstrates how even major media companies can be intimidated into self-censorship when faced with determined opposition from organizations with significant financial resources and willingness to engage in prolonged legal warfare. This outcome validates Stan's warning about the dangers of allowing fear and intimidation to determine what can be discussed or criticized in public forums dedicated to free expression and democratic discourse. The psychological realism of Stan's experience reflects genuine understanding of how recruitment and indoctrination processes operate in real-world contexts, moving beyond simple mockery to provide authentic insight into the emotional and social dynamics that make people vulnerable to exploitation by groups that promise spiritual growth, personal improvement, and community belonging. The episode's attention to detail regarding organizational techniques and psychological manipulation suggests careful research and genuine concern for educating viewers about these dangers rather than simply entertaining them. The broader cultural impact of the episode extends beyond its specific criticism of Scientology to encompass questions about the relationship between religious freedom and consumer protection, the responsibility of media organizations to investigate and expose potentially harmful groups, and the limits of what should be considered acceptable behavior in the name of spiritual or philosophical belief. The episode's treatment of these themes through animated comedy makes complex issues accessible to audiences who might not otherwise engage with serious discussions of religious manipulation and organizational abuse. The celebrity culture critique embedded within the Scientology storyline reveals how fame and wealth can make individuals more rather than less susceptible to exploitation by groups that understand how to appeal to the psychological needs and vulnerabilities that success in entertainment industries often creates rather than resolves. The episode suggests that celebrities' apparent endorsement of controversial organizations may reflect their own victimization rather than genuine conviction about the value of what they are promoting. The long-term legacy of Trapped in the Closet includes its eventual return to South Park's rotation after years of legal pressure and corporate caution, demonstrating that controversial content can sometimes regain its place in public discourse when legal threats prove unfounded and public interest in the suppressed material creates pressure for its restoration. This eventual victory for free expression provides hope that censorship based on intimidation and legal threats may not always be permanent or effective in silencing important criticism and social commentary. The episode's influence on public perception of Scientology and similar organizations extends far beyond its immediate viewership to encompass broader cultural conversations about the legitimacy of groups that combine spiritual claims with aggressive business practices and legal intimidation of critics. The detailed exposure of organizational techniques and beliefs has contributed to increased public awareness and skepticism regarding recruitment efforts and claims made by controversial religious movements. In the gentle quiet of reflection, we recognize that Trapped in the Closet represents more than entertainment or even social criticism, but rather a form of public service that uses the unique power of satirical comedy to expose dangerous organizational practices and protect vulnerable individuals from sophisticated forms of psychological and financial exploitation. The episode's courage in facing legal threats and its ultimate survival, despite institutional pressure, demonstrates the enduring importance of creative voices willing to speak uncomfortable truths about powerful organizations that prefer to operate in secrecy and silence, rather than submitting to public scrutiny and democratic accountability. In the tender examination of faith, addiction, and the complex relationship between personal responsibility and divine intervention, few episodes have stirred as much religious controversy as Bloody Mary, an exploration of Catholic imagery and alcoholism recovery that became so contentious it was removed from regular rotation and sparked protests from religious organizations worldwide. This seemingly straightforward story about a father's struggle with drinking and a miraculous bleeding statue became a profound meditation on the nature of religious faith, the psychology of addiction treatment, and the dangerous intersection between spiritual seeking and institutional control over individual recovery processes. The genesis of Randy Marsh's encounter with the legal system begins with what appears to be a simple case of poor judgment, a father picking up his son from karate practice while under the influence of alcohol. However, this moment of parental irresponsibility quickly escalates into a comprehensive examination of how contemporary society approaches addiction, personal accountability, and the role that religious belief plays in recovery programs that claim to be secular while requiring participants to embrace spiritual concepts that may conflict with their personal beliefs or philosophical orientations. The traffic stop that results in Randy's arrest demonstrates how quickly private behavior can become public legal matter when it involves potential danger to others, particularly children who depend on adults to make responsible decisions about their safety and well-being. The police officer's professional response to Randy's intoxicated state reveals the routine nature of these encounters, while also highlighting the serious consequences that can result from what individuals might consider minor lapses in judgment or temporary losses of self-control. Randy's court appearance and subsequent punishment assignment to speak at Stan's school creates an opportunity for the episode to explore how the legal system attempts to use public embarrassment and educational requirements as deterrents to future misconduct. The scene where Randy addresses Stan's class while suffering obvious hangover effects provides both comic relief and serious commentary on how addiction affects not only the individual user, but also family members who must witness their loved ones struggle with substances and the social consequences of their behavior. Miss Garrison's contribution to Randy's educational presentation reveals the casual cruelty that often characterizes adult interactions with children, as she uses Randy's legal troubles as an opportunity to humiliate Stan rather than provide genuine education about the dangers of alcohol abuse. Her comment about Stan potentially ending up like his father demonstrates how educators can abuse their authority to inflict emotional damage on students while pretending to serve educational or moral purposes that justify their harmful behavior. The introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program provides the episode with its central examination of how addiction treatment has become thoroughly integrated with religious concepts, despite claims of being based on medical science and secular therapeutic principles. Randy's discovery that the program requires belief in a higher power and surrender of personal agency to divine authority reveals how supposedly medical treatments can actually function as forms of religious indoctrination that may conflict with participants' personal beliefs or philosophical commitments. The 12-step program's insistence that alcoholism is a disease rather than a behavioral choice creates a philosophical framework that removes personal responsibility while simultaneously requiring spiritual submission to external authority. This contradiction demonstrates how treatment approaches can combine medical language with religious concepts in ways that confuse rather than clarify the nature of addiction and recovery, potentially undermining individuals' confidence in their own ability to make positive changes through personal effort and rational decision-making. Randy's enthusiastic embrace of his disease diagnosis and his exaggerated physical symptoms reveal how the medical model of addiction can become a form of learned helplessness that encourages individuals to view themselves as permanently impaired rather than temporarily struggling with behavioral choices that can be modified through appropriate support and personal commitment. His wheelchair and dramatic presentation of weakness demonstrate how identity as a sick person can become more appealing than the hard work required for genuine recovery and lifestyle change. The appearance of the Bleeding Virgin Mary statue introduces supernatural elements that transform Randy's personal struggle with alcohol into a broader examination of how desperate individuals seek miraculous solutions to problems that require sustained effort and behavioral modification. The statue's mysterious bleeding creates community excitement and religious fervor that demonstrates how quickly rational people can abandon critical thinking when presented with phenomena that appear to validate their spiritual beliefs or offer easy answers to complex problems. The massive crowds that gather to witness the bleeding statue reveal the profound hunger for meaning and transcendence that characterizes contemporary life, as people abandon their daily responsibilities to participate in what they believe might be a divine intervention in earthly affairs. The diversity of ailments and problems that people hope to resolve through contact with the statue demonstrates how religious faith can become a substitute for medical treatment, personal responsibility, and practical problem-solving approaches that might actually address underlying issues. Randy's decision to cut in line because his alcoholism is more serious than other people's problems reveals how the disease model of addiction can create a hierarchy of suffering that prioritizes certain conditions while diminishing the reality of other forms of human struggle and pain. His dismissal of brain cancer as less significant than his drinking problem demonstrates how thoroughly he has internalized messages about his own victimhood and the supposed severity of his condition compared to genuinely life-threatening medical emergencies. The confrontation with the bleeding statue itself represents the climactic moment of Randy's spiritual journey, as he faces what he believes to be direct divine intervention in his personal struggle with alcohol dependency. His decision not to drink the blood, despite believing it could cure his disease, demonstrates a moment of genuine spiritual growth and personal responsibility that transcends both the medical model of addiction and the magical thinking associated with miraculous cures and divine intervention. Randy's 5 days of sobriety following his encounter with the statue provide evidence that genuine change is possible through personal commitment and spiritual experience, regardless of whether the catalyst for that change involves actual supernatural intervention or simply the psychological impact of believing that one has received divine assistance. This period of success demonstrates that recovery is possible through internal transformation rather than external medical treatment or religious ritual. The Pope's investigation and subsequent declaration that the statue's bleeding is not miraculous, but rather a natural bodily function, creates a crisis of faith that demonstrates how institutional religious authority can undermine individual spiritual experience and personal growth when official doctrine conflicts with believers' personal encounters with the sacred. The clinical explanation of menstruation as the source of the bleeding transforms what appeared to be divine intervention into ordinary biological process. The Pope's crude language and dismissive attitude toward what many believers considered a sacred phenomenon reveals the gap that can exist between institutional religious leadership and the spiritual needs of ordinary believers who seek meaning and transcendence through direct religious experience rather than theological doctrine or ecclesiastical authority. His casual profanity and biological reductionism demonstrate how religious institutions can become disconnected from the spiritual hunger that drives people to seek religious experience in the first place. Randy's immediate return to drinking following the Pope's declaration demonstrates how fragile recovery can be when it depends on external validation rather than internal commitment and personal responsibility. His disappointment at learning that his spiritual experience was not officially sanctioned by religious authority reveals how institutional approval can become more important than actual behavioral change or genuine spiritual growth in the lives of people who have learned to depend on external sources of meaning and validation. Stan's intervention and speech about personal responsibility represents the episode's clearest statement about the relationship between individual agency and recovery from addiction or other behavioral problems that cause harm to oneself and others. His recognition that Randy's 5 days of sobriety proved his ability to control his drinking provides a foundation for understanding addiction as a matter of personal choice rather than medical inevitability or divine intervention, requiring supernatural assistance. The concept of discipline as an internal quality that must be developed through practice rather than received through external intervention provides an alternative to both the medical model that treats addiction as permanent disease, the religious model that requires divine assistance for recovery. Stan's insight that learning to drink responsibly requires more discipline than complete abstinence offers a nuanced understanding of behavioral change that recognizes both personal responsibility and the complexity of developing healthy relationships with substances that can be harmful when used excessively. The Catholic Church's response to the episode's broadcast and their successful pressure for its removal from regular rotation demonstrates how religious institutions can use their cultural and economic influence to suppress artistic expression that challenges their authority or presents alternative perspectives on spiritual and moral questions. The episode's disappearance from syndication represents a victory for institutional censorship over free expression and open dialogue about religious topics. The long-term implications of the episode's censorship extend beyond immediate questions of religious sensitivity to encompass broader issues about the relationship between faith-based recovery programs and secular alternatives, the role of personal responsibility in addiction treatment, and the dangers of combining medical treatment with religious indoctrination in ways that may undermine rather than support genuine healing and behavioral change. The episode's treatment of Alcoholics Anonymous and similar 12-step programs raises important questions about how society should approach addiction treatment and whether programs that require religious belief should be mandated by courts or recommended by medical professionals as the primary or only effective approach to recovery. The criticism of disease model thinking challenges assumptions about addiction that have become deeply embedded in contemporary treatment approaches and legal responses to substance abuse. The philosophical tensions explored through Randy's story reflect broader cultural conflicts about the nature of human agency, the role of faith in healing, and the relationship between individual responsibility and social support in addressing behavioral problems that affect not only the individuals involved, but also their families and communities. The episode suggests that genuine recovery requires honest acknowledgement of personal choice and commitment to behavioral change, rather than passive acceptance of medical or religious explanations that minimize individual agency. The visual imagery of the bleeding statue and the community's response provides powerful commentary on how religious symbolism can be manipulated or misinterpreted in ways that serve psychological needs while potentially undermining genuine spiritual growth and practical problem solving. The transformation of a natural biological process into perceived divine intervention demonstrates how desperately people seek transcendent meaning in their lives, and how easily that seeking can be misdirected toward magical thinking rather than authentic spiritual development. In the quiet contemplation of these themes, we recognize that Bloody Mary represents more than commentary on addiction treatment or religious authority, but rather a comprehensive examination of how individuals and communities navigate the complex relationship between faith and reason, personal responsibility and external support, institutional authority, and individual spiritual experience. The episode's controversial reception and subsequent censorship demonstrate the ongoing tension between artistic freedom and religious sensitivity, while its substantive treatment of addiction and recovery provides valuable insight into alternative approaches to behavioral change that emphasize personal agency over medical or religious dependency. In the intricate web of international relations and economic dependencies that characterize contemporary global commerce, few cultural phenomena have revealed as much about the complex relationship between artistic expression and political power as South Park's confrontation with Chinese censorship through the episodes China Problem and Banned in China. These interconnected stories demonstrate how quickly local creative decisions can escalate into international incidents with profound consequences for both individual artists and major entertainment corporations that depend on global markets for their financial survival and continued growth. The psychological foundation of Cartman's anti-Chinese crusade emerges from his viewing of the Beijing Olympics opening ceremony, an elaborate display of coordination and cultural pride that triggers deep-seated anxieties about American cultural and economic dominance in an increasingly multipolar world. His nightmare-inducing reaction to what most observers would consider an impressive artistic achievement reveals how cultural displays of competence and organization by other nations can be interpreted as existential threats by individuals whose personal identity is closely tied to their country's perceived superiority over international competitors. Cartman's strategic analysis of Chinese demographics and economic growth demonstrates a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of geopolitical trends and their potential implications for American prosperity and global influence. His recognition that China's population of over 1 billion people, combined with their rapid economic development and technological advancement, represents a fundamental challenge to American hegemony, reflects genuine concerns that extend far beyond his typical childhood preoccupations, with immediate gratification and personal advantage. The recruitment of his friends to participate in his anti-Chinese campaign reveals Cartman's natural ability to frame personal obsessions as patriotic duties that require collective action from his peer group. His presentation of the Chinese threat as an imminent danger to their way of life transforms what could be dismissed as xenophobic paranoia into a seemingly reasonable response to legitimate national security concerns that responsible citizens should take seriously and address through appropriate, defensive measures. Kyle's exhausted refusal to participate in another of Cartman's schemes initially appears to represent simple fatigue with his friend's endless supply of conspiracy theories and grandiose plans. However, the revelation that Kyle is simultaneously processing his own traumatic encounter with disappointing media content creates a parallel narrative about how personal psychological wounds can affect individuals' capacity to engage with broader social and political issues that require sustained attention and emotional investment. The Indiana Jones trauma subplot provides crucial insight into how beloved cultural franchises can become sources of genuine psychological distress when new installments violate fans' expectations and emotional investment in established characters and narratives. Kyle's inability to process his disappointment with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull demonstrates how deeply audiences can internalize fictional worlds and how betrayals of that trust by creators can create lasting emotional damage that affects other areas of their lives. The specific focus on aliens as the source of Kyle's distress reflects broader anxieties about how contemporary entertainment increasingly relies on science fiction elements and special effects rather than character development and storytelling quality that originally attracted audiences to these franchises. His repeated insistence that aliens do not belong in Indiana Jones movies represents a purist perspective that values narrative consistency and genre integrity over commercial considerations and technological innovation. Butter's enthusiastic participation in Cartman's mission demonstrates his continued willingness to support his friends' projects despite their history of exploitation and manipulation. His genuine excitement about becoming one of the brave little boys who fought back against foreign invasion reveals his natural patriotic instincts and his desire to participate in meaningful collective action that serves purposes larger than individual self-interest. The P.F. Chang's infiltration sequence represents one of the most problematic aspects of these episodes, as Cartman and Butters adopt crude, stereotypical disguises and behavior patterns that reflect shallow understanding of Chinese culture and deep-seated racial prejudices that transform legitimate geopolitical concerns into xenophobic harassment of innocent individuals who happen to share ethnic heritage with citizens of a foreign nation. The escalation from surveillance to hostage-taking demonstrates how quickly amateur intelligence gathering can spiral into genuine criminal activity when participants lack training, supervision, and clear understanding of legal boundaries that distinguish between patriotic activism and domestic terrorism. Butter's reluctant participation in increasingly serious crimes reveals how good-natured individuals can become complicit in harmful actions when they trust friends who gradually escalate their demands for support and assistance. The accidental shooting incidents that punctuate the restaurant's siege provide darkly comic commentary on how easily firearms can cause unintended harm when handled by inexperienced users in high-stress situations. Butter's repeated targeting of sensitive anatomy suggests either remarkable incompetence or subconscious rebellion against Cartman's increasingly dangerous demands for violent action against innocent civilians. The parallel storyline involving Steven Spielberg and George Lucas as perpetrators of cultural crimes against beloved fictional characters creates a satirical framework for understanding how creators can be held responsible for disappointing their audiences and violating the trust that fans place in their stewardship of cherished cultural properties. The legal proceedings against these directors transform artistic disappointment into criminal liability in ways that reflect genuine fan anger, while also commenting on the absurdity of treating creative decisions as prosecutable offenses. Randy's simultaneous business expansion into Chinese markets with his Tegrity Farms operation provides a counterpoint to Cartman's anti-Chinese activism by demonstrating how American entrepreneurs increasingly depend on international consumers for their economic survival and growth. His arrest upon arrival in China for marijuana possession reveals the dangers that await American business people who fail to research local laws and cultural sensitivities before attempting to operate in foreign markets. The Chinese prison system's treatment of Randy and other American detainees provides insight into how authoritarian governments can use legal processes to punish individuals whose behavior or products challenge state authority or cultural values. Randy's encounter with Winnie the Pooh in prison creates a surreal commentary on how political censorship can extend to beloved children's characters who become associated with criticism of government leaders through social media, memes, and popular culture references. Stan's band storyline and their Hollywood biopic demonstrates how American entertainment companies increasingly modify their creative content to avoid offending Chinese censors and maintain access to lucrative international markets. The producer's explicit instructions to lower ideals of free speech in order to access Chinese financial support reveals how economic incentives can gradually erode artistic integrity and cultural values that were previously considered non-negotiable. The repeated script revisions and increasing censorship demands that Stan faces during the biopic production process illustrate how self-censorship can become a slippery slope where artists gradually surrender more and more creative control in pursuit of commercial success and international distribution opportunities. Each compromise makes the next concession easier to justify until the original artistic vision becomes completely unrecognizable. Mickey Mouse's appearance as a corporate representative, willing to sacrifice any artistic principle or cultural value for Chinese market access, provides a scathing commentary on how major entertainment conglomerates have transformed from creators of American cultural content into international businesses that prioritize profit over national values or artistic integrity. His willingness to abandon even beloved characters like Winnie the Pooh demonstrates how thoroughly commercial considerations have overwhelmed cultural and creative concerns. The confrontation between Randy and Disney over integrity versus commercial success creates a David versus Goliath narrative, where individual entrepreneurs with authentic products and values challenge massive corporations that have lost connection to the principles that originally justified their cultural influence and economic success. Randy's insistence that integrity cannot be purchased or manufactured provides a moral foundation for resisting commercial pressures that require abandoning personal values. Stan's eventual recognition that he cannot sell his soul for commercial success and his decision to abandon the biopic project represents a rare victory for artistic integrity over economic incentives. His public statement about refusing to live in a world where China controls American art demonstrates the kind of principled stand that democratic societies require from their artists and cultural creators when faced with authoritarian pressure and economic coercion. The episode's exploration of how censorship operates through economic pressure rather than direct government control reveals the sophisticated ways that authoritarian regimes can influence foreign cultural production without appearing to violate international principles of free expression and artistic autonomy. The voluntary self-censorship that results from market access concerns can be more effective than direct prohibition because it operates through willing compliance rather than forced submission. Randy's experience in Chinese prison and his eventual propaganda statement praising the Communist Party demonstrates how sustained pressure and isolation can break down individual resistance and force even principled people to abandon their values in exchange for personal safety and freedom. His ultimate capitulation reveals the psychological costs of standing up to authoritarian systems that have unlimited time and resources to break down individual resistance. The broader implications of Chinese censorship extend beyond individual episodes or entertainment properties to encompass fundamental questions about cultural sovereignty, artistic freedom, and the role that economic incentives play in shaping global cultural discourse. The willingness of American companies to modify their content for Chinese markets represents a form of soft cultural colonization that operates through economic rather than military or political means. The long-term consequences of these episodes' creation and distribution include their complete banning from Chinese markets and streaming platforms, demonstrating how artistic criticism of authoritarian regimes can have immediate and lasting economic consequences for both individual creators and corporate distributors. The financial costs of maintaining artistic integrity provide a practical test of how much entertainment companies value free expression compared to commercial success. The episode's treatment of Winnie the Pooh as a political prisoner creates a particularly effective symbol of how authoritarian censorship can extend to the most innocent and beloved cultural figures when they become associated with political criticism or social commentary. The image of childhood characters imprisoned for political reasons provides a powerful visual representation of how censorship operates and what values are at stake in struggles over cultural freedom. The contrast between American and Chinese approaches to handling offensive or critical content reveals fundamental differences in political philosophy and cultural values that extend far beyond entertainment industry concerns to encompass broader questions about individual rights, government authority, and the role of criticism in healthy societies. The Chinese government's willingness to ban entire shows and companies for political content demonstrates how authoritarian systems view cultural criticism as existential threats rather than healthy democratic discourse. In the gentle reflection on these complex international dynamics, we recognize that the China episodes represent more than entertainment, industry, commentary, but rather a comprehensive examination of how global economic integration can create new forms of cultural pressure and political influence that operate through market mechanisms rather than traditional diplomatic or military channels. The episode's own censorship and commercial consequences demonstrate the reality of the forces they critique, making their artistic vision inseparable from their practical impact on the creators and distributors who brought them to public attention. In the remarkable exploration of interfaith, cooperation, and religious unity, that characterizes one of South Park's most philosophically sophisticated yet retroactively controversial episodes. Super Best Friends presents a vision of spiritual collaboration that transcends denominational boundaries while simultaneously creating the very content that would later become impossible to broadcast due to changing cultural sensitivities and escalating fears about religious imagery in animated entertainment. This episode represents a unique moment in television history where major religious figures from diverse traditions work together as superhero teammates, creating a framework for understanding how different spiritual paths might complement rather than compete with each other in addressing contemporary challenges. The genesis of the Super Best Friends concept emerges from South Park's characteristic willingness to treat religious figures as active participants in contemporary life rather than distant historical figures whose relevance is limited to ancient texts and traditional worship practices. The transformation of Jesus Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, and Seaman into a superhero team provides a framework for exploring how different religious traditions might contribute their unique strengths and perspectives to solving problems that require both spiritual wisdom and practical intervention in the material world. Jesus Christ's role as team leader reflects his cultural prominence in American society, while also demonstrating the episode's commitment to treating religious figures as individuals with distinct personalities and capabilities, rather than interchangeable symbols of generic spirituality. His miracle-working abilities, demonstrated through the transformation of water into wine and the multiplication of bread and fish, establish his credentials as both spiritual teacher and practical problem solver, capable of addressing material needs, as well as providing moral guidance to his teammates and the community they serve. Buddha's contribution to the team through his powers of invisibility provides both comic relief and genuine insight into Buddhist philosophical concepts about the nature of reality, perception, and the relationship between material and spiritual existence. His repeated use of this ability to avoid responsibilities or difficult situations creates humor, while also reflecting legitimate questions about detachment, engagement, and the proper relationship between spiritual practice and worldly involvement that characterize many contemplative traditions. The inclusion of Muhammad as a team member with flame-based powers represents the episode's most significant contribution to interfaith dialogue and its most problematic legacy in terms of subsequent cultural sensitivities about religious imagery in popular media. His comfortable integration into the superhero team and his positive relationships with figures from other religious traditions creates a model for Islamic Christian-Buddhist cooperation that seems almost impossible to imagine in contemporary political and cultural contexts. Krishna's participation as the Hindu representative brings Eastern philosophical concepts about divine manifestation, cosmic consciousness, and the multiplicity of spiritual paths into dialogue with Western and Middle Eastern religious traditions in ways that suggest genuine respect for Vedantic philosophy rather than superficial cultural appropriation or stereotypical representation. His divine nature and cosmic perspective provide the team with insights and capabilities that complement the more personally focused approaches of other religious traditions. Joseph Smith's presence as the Mormon prophet adds a distinctively American religious voice to the international and ancient spiritual traditions represented by other team members, while also acknowledging the controversial aspects of his historical legacy and the ongoing questions about the legitimacy of his prophetic claims. His inclusion demonstrates the episode's commitment to treating all religious traditions as potentially valuable contributors to spiritual wisdom and practical problem-solving, regardless of their age, cultural acceptance, or theological sophistication. Lao Tzu's representation of Taoist philosophy brings concepts of natural harmony, effortless action, and the balance between opposing forces into the team's decision-making processes and problem-solving approaches. His ancient wisdom and understanding of cosmic principles provide a foundation for addressing conflicts and challenges that require long-term perspective and appreciation for the complex relationships between different elements of natural and social systems. Seaman's inclusion as the team's most mysterious and potentially problematic member creates ongoing questions about his origins, abilities, and relationship to traditional religious categories, while also providing comic relief through his unfortunate name and the confusion it generates among other characters. His presence suggests that spiritual wisdom and supernatural capabilities might extend beyond traditional religious boundaries to encompass other forms of consciousness and power that resist easy categorization. The Hall of Super Best Friends serves as both headquarters and sanctuary, providing a physical location where representatives of different religious traditions can gather, plan their interventions, and coordinate their responses to threats that require collective action. The architectural and decorative elements of this space reflect the diverse cultural traditions represented by team members, while creating a unified environment that supports their collaborative work and shared mission. David Blaine's emergence as the primary antagonist demonstrates the episode's sophisticated understanding of how charismatic leaders can exploit people's spiritual hunger and psychological vulnerabilities for personal gain and ego gratification. His transformation from street magician to cult leader illustrates the dangerous potential that exists when individuals with genuine supernatural abilities or exceptional persuasive skills decide to use their gifts to manipulate and control others rather than serve legitimate spiritual or educational purposes. The cult recruitment process that Blaine employs reveals the sophisticated psychological techniques that predatory spiritual leaders use to identify vulnerable individuals and gradually separate them from their normal support systems and rational decision-making processes. His targeting of the South Park children demonstrates how young people's natural curiosity and desire for belonging can be weaponized by skilled manipulators who understand how to present exploitation as spiritual development and community service. Kyle's gradual indoctrination and his enthusiastic participation in Blaine's recruitment efforts provide insight into how even intelligent and normally skeptical individuals can become convinced that they are participating in something meaningful and beneficial when subjected to sustained psychological manipulation by charismatic authorities. His transformation from reluctant participant to enthusiastic advocate demonstrates how quickly reasonable people can lose their critical thinking abilities when immersed in environments that reward conformity and discourage questioning. Stan's resistance to the indoctrination process and his eventual escape from the compound represent the kind of spiritual and intellectual independence that protects individuals from exploitation by predatory organizations and charismatic leaders who seek to replace personal judgment with organizational loyalty and unquestioning obedience to external authority. His ability to maintain his skepticism and seek help from legitimate spiritual authorities demonstrates the importance of developing strong internal moral compasses and critical thinking skills. The mass suicide plan that Blaine proposes to his followers represents the ultimate expression of how spiritual manipulation can escalate into genuine danger when leaders become convinced that their personal desires and emotional needs justify extreme measures that cause harm to the people who trust them. The willingness of previously rational individuals to participate in collective self-destruction demonstrates how thoroughly cult indoctrination can override basic survival instincts and moral reasoning. Jesus Christ's decision to seek help from his superhero teammates rather than attempting to handle the crisis alone reflects mature leadership and recognition that complex problems often require diverse perspectives and capabilities that exceed any individual's resources and expertise. His humility in acknowledging the limitations of his own powers and the value of collaborative approaches provides a model for how religious leaders might work together across denominational boundaries. The Super Best Friends intervention in the cult crisis demonstrates how different religious traditions can contribute complementary strengths and perspectives to addressing contemporary social problems that require both spiritual wisdom and practical action. Their coordinated response to Blaine's manipulation shows how interfaith cooperation might operate when religious figures prioritize service to human welfare over institutional competition or theological disputes. The giant stone Abraham Lincoln battle represents the episode's most spectacular and absurd sequence, transforming the Lincoln Memorial into an instrument of destruction, while also providing commentary on how national symbols and historical figures can be manipulated for purposes that contradict their original meaning and significance. The response of creating giant John Wilkes Booth to counter this threat creates a surreal historical confrontation that operates simultaneously as entertainment and political commentary. The resolution of the crisis through collective action and the restoration of normal community life demonstrates the positive potential that exists when spiritual leadership is exercised responsibly and different religious traditions work together to address shared challenges rather than competing for converts or cultural dominance. The Super Best Friends' success in protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation provides a model for how religious authority might be used constructively in contemporary society. Stan's closing speech about taking wisdom from different religious traditions while maintaining individual critical thinking and personal responsibility reflects the episode's central message about the value of spiritual diversity and the dangers of exclusive loyalty to any single religious authority or organizational structure. His recognition that genuine spiritual development requires active engagement with multiple perspectives rather than passive acceptance of any particular doctrine provides a framework for healthy religious practice in pluralistic societies. The episode's retroactive controversy and removal from regular distribution demonstrates how cultural sensitivities about religious imagery can change over time in ways that make previously acceptable content suddenly problematic for broadcasters and distributors who must navigate complex relationships with diverse religious communities and international markets. The transformation of Muhammad from uncontroversial team member to forbidden image illustrates how political developments can alter the cultural meaning and commercial viability of artistic content. The long-term impact of Super Best Friends on discussions of religious representation in popular media extends beyond its immediate entertainment value to encompass broader questions about interfaith dialogue, the role of humor in addressing religious topics, and the relationship between artistic freedom and religious sensitivity. The episode's vision of cooperative religious leadership remains relevant even as its specific imagery has become culturally and commercially problematic. The philosophical implications of the Super Best Friends concept suggest that religious diversity might be understood as a source of strength rather than division when different traditions are approached with respect and genuine interest in learning from their unique contributions to human spiritual development. The episode's treatment of religious figures as active participants in contemporary problem-solving rather than distant historical authorities provides an alternative to both religious fundamentalism and secular dismissal of spiritual wisdom. In the quiet contemplation of this remarkable episode's legacy and subsequent unavailability, we recognize that Super Best Friends represents both the potential for genuine interfaith cooperation and the practical challenges that prevent such cooperation from developing in real-world contexts, where political tensions, cultural sensitivities, and commercial considerations often override shared spiritual values and common human concerns. The episode's disappearance from public access serves as a reminder of how quickly cultural progress can be reversed when fear and commercial pressure overcome commitment to dialogue, understanding, and the kind of spiritual collaboration that remains necessary for addressing the complex challenges facing contemporary society. In the sprawling tapestry of celebrity vengeance and religious controversy that defines South Park's most ambitious and heavily censored two-part finale, the episodes 200 and 201 represent the culmination of years of satirical commentary on famous personalities, religious sensitivities, and the complex relationship between artistic freedom and institutional pressure that characterizes contemporary entertainment production. These episodes serve as both a celebration of the show's irreverent legacy and a sobering examination of how fear and intimidation can silence even the most established voices in American comedy when powerful interests align to suppress controversial content through legal threats and economic pressure. The genesis of this epic confrontation begins with what appears to be a simple field trip to a fudge-packing facility, where Stan's innocent observation about Tom Cruise's professional activities triggers a cascade of legal retaliation that demonstrates how quickly casual commentary can escalate into existential threats for entire communities. When celebrities possess sufficient resources and motivation to transform personal embarrassment into systematic revenge against those who dare to mock their public personas or professional choices, Tom Cruise's decision to organize a massive class action lawsuit involving over 200 celebrities represents an unprecedented mobilization of famous personalities united by their shared experience of being satirized by South Park's writers and their collective desire to extract both financial compensation and public apology for years of comedic treatment that they consider defamatory and harmful to their professional reputations and personal dignity. This coalition demonstrates how individual grievances can be transformed into collective action when sufficient numbers of aggrieved parties recognize their common interest in challenging satirical commentary that operates beyond their direct control or influence. The specific nature of the celebrities' demands reveals the complex psychology of fame and public perception that drives their motivation for revenge against a small animated television program that has consistently treated their public personas as legitimate targets for comedic commentary. Their insistence that South Park has crossed lines of acceptable satirical commentary into genuinely harmful defamation suggests that even individuals who have achieved extraordinary success and public recognition remain vulnerable to criticism and mockery in ways that can cause genuine psychological distress and professional damage. Randy Marsh's immediate blame of Stan for creating this crisis, through his inability to control his observations about celebrity behavior, demonstrates the way that systemic problems often get reduced to individual responsibility when communities face external threats that require collective response rather than personal accountability. His suggestion that Stan's appearance contributed to the problem reveals the kind of deflection and blame shifting that characterizes many family dynamics when external pressure creates internal stress and conflict. The town's desperate search for solutions to the celebrity lawsuit leads to the identification of Muhammad as the key to resolving their legal troubles, creating a connection between celebrity, vanity, and religious sensitivity that transforms a relatively straightforward defamation case into a complex negotiation involving some of the most controversial and dangerous topics in contemporary cultural discourse. The celebrity's belief that Muhammad possesses supernatural immunity to ridicule represents their ultimate fantasy of achieving invulnerability to the kind of satirical treatment that has made their lives more difficult and emotionally complicated. Stan's recollection of his previous encounter with Muhammad during the Super Best Friends episode provides crucial backstory that connects these episodes to the show's earlier exploration of religious cooperation and interfaith dialogue, while also highlighting how dramatically cultural attitudes toward religious imagery have changed in the intervening years since that original broadcast. His confident assertion that Muhammad's previous appearance caused no violence at all demonstrates how quickly cultural sensitivities can shift in ways that transform previously acceptable content into forbidden material. Jesus Christ's inability to remain silent about the giant John Wilkes Booth incident provides comic relief, while also demonstrating how religious figures can become caught up in secular conflicts and political controversies, despite their attempts to maintain spiritual focus and avoid worldly entanglements. His reference to past supernatural battles reveals the ongoing nature of cosmic conflicts that extend far beyond immediate human concerns and celebrity grievances. Randy's artistic attempt to sketch Muhammad based on his son's description represents the dangerous intersection between parental support and cultural sensitivity, as his well-intentioned efforts to help solve the community crisis through visual representation create additional risks and complications that extend beyond the original celebrity lawsuit. His admission of conducting research while producing obviously inadequate artistic results demonstrates how good intentions and limited abilities can combine to create more problems than they solve. Tom Cruise's revelation of his master plan to harvest Muhammad's supposed immunity, to ridicule and distribute it among his celebrity coalition, demonstrates the sophisticated strategic thinking that underlies their collective action against South Park. His vision of a world where celebrities cannot be mocked or criticized represents the ultimate authoritarian fantasy, where public figures achieve complete protection from the kind of democratic discourse and satirical commentary that healthy societies require for maintaining accountability and perspective regarding power and influence. The specific targeting of Tim Burton and Johnny Depp for their repetitive creative collaborations provides insight into how celebrity criticism operates through pattern recognition and artistic evaluation, rather than simple personal attack or gratuitous moquere. The suggestion that Burton lacks original creative vision and relies excessively on Depp's presence and similar visual aesthetics represents legitimate artistic criticism that celebrities want to transform into actionable defamation through legal intimidation and economic pressure. Cartman's relationship with Jennifer Lopez, revealed to be his alternate personality and criminal alter ego Mitch Connor, creates a psychological subplot that demonstrates how childhood trauma and identity confusion can manifest in elaborate fantasy relationships that serve both creative and defensive functions. The revelation that this persona is actually a wanted criminal with outstanding warrants adds genuine danger and complexity to what initially appeared to be simple childhood roleplay and imagination. The super best friend's reluctance to allow Muhammad to participate in public activities demonstrates how legitimate security concerns and cultural sensitivity can create practical limitations on religious freedom and interfaith cooperation that extend beyond theoretical policy discussions into real-world constraints on spiritual practice and religious expression. Their recognition that public appearances by certain religious figures can trigger violence and international incidents reflects the unfortunate reality that spiritual symbols have become weaponized in contemporary political conflicts. Joseph Smith's explanation of the special considerations required for religious figures in public spaces reveals the complex legal and cultural framework that governs religious representation in secular contexts, while also acknowledging the Mormon leader's own controversial historical legacy and the ongoing questions about religious authority and prophetic legitimacy that characterize many contemporary spiritual movements and organizational structures. Buddha's ongoing substance abuse problems, referenced through his teammates' concerns about his behavior and habits, provide a darkly comic commentary on how even enlightened spiritual figures can struggle with personal issues and self-destructive behaviors that undermine their ability to serve their communities effectively and maintain their spiritual authority and moral credibility among their followers and peers. The development of the windowless van solution for transporting Muhammad safely to the celebrity meeting demonstrates the practical compromises and security measures that become necessary when religious imagery becomes associated with violence and political controversy. This transportation method transforms what should be a simple journey into an elaborate security operation that reflects the dangerous cultural environment that has developed around certain forms of religious representation. The celebrities' creation of a goo extraction machine represents their commitment to using technological solutions to address what they perceive as supernatural problems, demonstrating how contemporary approaches to personal and social challenges often rely on scientific or pseudoscientific interventions rather than philosophical, spiritual, or psychological approaches that might address underlying causes rather than surface symptoms. Rob Reiner's involvement in the goo extraction process and his explanation of the scientific principles underlying their approach reveals how legitimate scientific concepts can be distorted and misapplied to serve purposes that have nothing to do with genuine research or therapeutic intervention. His participation demonstrates how cultural and political figures can lend apparent credibility to questionable enterprises through their association and endorsement. The Ginger Revolution subplot, led by Scott Tenorman in his return as a figure seeking revenge against Cartman for previous humiliations, creates a parallel conflict that demonstrates how past actions and unresolved grievances can resurface at inconvenient moments to complicate already difficult situations. The Ginger's demands to see Muhammad without his protective covering create additional pressure and danger that threatens to derail the carefully negotiated arrangements between the celebrities and the town. The revelation of Cartman's parentage and his relationship to Scott Tenorman through their shared father creates a complex family drama that explains years of conflict and mutual antagonism between these characters, while also demonstrating how childhood cruelties and revenge cycles can have lasting consequences that extend far beyond their original context and continue to generate new forms of conflict and trauma. The switch of Santa Claus for Muhammad in the bear costume represents the kind of desperate improvisation that communities resort to when faced with impossible demands and conflicting pressures from multiple powerful interests. This deception demonstrates how elaborate lies and cover-ups often become necessary when legitimate solutions are not available or when honest responses would create unacceptable risks for vulnerable populations. Mecca Streisand's rampage through South Park creates massive destruction that serves as both spectacular entertainment and serious commentary on how celebrity ego and wounded vanity can manifest in genuinely dangerous and destructive behavior that threatens entire communities. Her kaiju-style attack on the town demonstrates how personal grievances between celebrities and satirists can escalate into conflicts that cause collateral damage to innocent bystanders who have no involvement in the original. Disputes. The Super Best Friends battle against Mecha Streisand represents their most challenging intervention and their commitment to protecting ordinary people from the destructive consequences of celebrity conflicts and entertainment. Industry disputes. Their coordinated response demonstrates how genuine heroism often involves putting personal safety at risk to protect vulnerable populations from threats that exceed normal law enforcement capabilities. Neil Diamond's duet with Barbra Streisand provides an unexpected resolution to her destructive rampage, while also demonstrating how personal relationships and shared history can sometimes diffuse conflicts that seem impossible to resolve through conventional negotiation or force. Their musical collaboration represents the power of authentic human connection to overcome ego-driven destructive impulses and restore emotional balance to volatile situations. The failure of Muhammad's goo to provide immunity to ridicule creates a crisis for the celebrities who have invested enormous resources and effort in their revenge scheme, while also providing the episode's central commentary on the nature of criticism and the impossibility of achieving complete protection from satirical commentary in democratic societies that value free expression and open discourse about public figures and their behavior. The heavily censored speech about threats, violence, and fear represents the episode's most direct commentary on how intimidation and the threat of violence can effectively silence satirical commentary and critical discourse, even in societies that claim to value free expression and democratic debate. The bleeping and visual censorship that obscures this crucial message demonstrates how even discussions of censorship can themselves become subject to censorship when they touch on sensitive topics. The revelation that fear and violence, rather than supernatural powers, provide the only effective protection against satirical commentary represents a profound indictment of contemporary cultural dynamics and the ways that democratic discourse can be undermined by authoritarian tactics and the threat of retribution against those who engage in legitimate criticism and satirical commentary about powerful individuals and institutions. Tom Cruise's Exile to the Moon provides a final resolution to his conflict with satirical commentary, while also suggesting that complete isolation from human society may be the only way for celebrities to achieve the immunity from criticism that they desperately seek. This cosmic banishment represents both ultimate punishment and ultimate fulfillment of his desire to escape the kind of democratic accountability that healthy societies require from their public figures. The episode's heavy censorship during their original broadcast and their subsequent limited availability demonstrate how the very forces and pressures that they critique can be successfully deployed to silence the criticism itself, creating a situation where the satirical commentary about censorship becomes subject to the same censorship that it seeks to expose and challenge. In the gentle reflection on these banned and heavily censored episodes, we recognize that the 200 Saga represents more than entertainment or even sophisticated satirical commentary, but rather a comprehensive examination of the forces that threaten democratic discourse and artistic freedom in contemporary society. The episode's own censorship and limited availability serve as powerful validation of their central arguments about how fear, intimidation, and economic pressure can be used to silence even established voices when they challenge powerful interests or address topics that have become culturally or politically sensitive through association with violence and authoritarian pressure. In the fascinating intersection of consumer culture, childhood psychology, and international political paranoia that characterizes one of South Park's most prophetic examinations of cultural infiltration through commercial entertainment, the episode Chinpokomon presents a complex meditation on how foreign nations might exploit American children's natural enthusiasm for collectible gaming and toy marketing to achieve strategic objectives that extend far beyond simple commercial success into the realm of cultural influence and potential political subversion through the manipulation of young minds during their most formative developmental periods. The genesis of this cultural invasion begins with Cartman's discovery of a new Japanese entertainment phenomenon that combines the addictive mechanics of collectible card games with animated characters and storylines that appear innocent on the surface, while potentially containing deeper messages about cultural values, national identity, and appropriate responses to international conflict that gradually reshape children's understanding of their place in the world and their relationship to foreign nations and cultural traditions. The Chinpokomon franchise represents a masterful synthesis of everything that makes commercial entertainment appealing to young audiences, combining cute character designs with competitive gameplay mechanics that encourage continued purchasing and social interaction among peer groups who share enthusiasm for the same cultural products. The primary objective of collecting all available characters and achieving the status of Royal Crown Chinpokomon Master creates an artificial hierarchy that transforms consumer spending into social achievement and peer recognition. Cartman's immediate and enthusiastic embrace of this new cultural phenomenon demonstrates his natural susceptibility to marketing appeals that combine social status with personal accomplishment, particularly when those appeals are reinforced by peer group adoption and the promise of exclusive knowledge or abilities that distinguish initiated participants from those who remain outside the cultural movement. His desperate desire to become Royal Crown Chinpokomon Master reveals how effectively commercial enterprises can exploit children's natural competitive instincts and desire for recognition. The toy store experience that introduces the children to Chinpokomon products reveals the sophisticated retail strategies that support cultural infiltration through commercial channels, with elaborate displays, enthusiastic staff, and carefully designed packaging that creates an immersive environment where purchasing decisions feel like participation in something larger and more meaningful than simple consumer transactions. The store clerk's obvious enthusiasm and knowledge about the products creates an atmosphere of expertise and insider access that makes children feel special for participating. The supplemental messaging embedded within Chinpokomon advertising demonstrates how commercial entertainment can serve as a vehicle for cultural and political indoctrination when foreign producers understand how to integrate propaganda elements into otherwise innocent content in ways that bypass critical thinking and parental oversight. The happy feelings promised by the products mask more complex psychological manipulation designed to create positive associations with specific cultural values and political perspectives. Kyle's initial resistance to the Chinpokomon phenomenon and his subsequent conversion, following peer pressure and parental support, illustrates how even skeptical individuals can be drawn into cultural movements when social isolation becomes the alternative to participation. His father's provision of money to purchase Chinpokomon products demonstrates how parental desire to help children fit in with their peer groups can inadvertently support cultural influences that parents themselves do not fully understand or appreciate. The evolution from simple toy collecting to video game addiction reveals how cultural infiltration operates through escalating levels of engagement that gradually consume more time, attention, and psychological investment from participants who begin with casual interest, but become increasingly dependent on continued participation for social acceptance and personal satisfaction. The transition from dolls to electronic entertainment represents a deepening level of technological and cultural dependency. Kenny's seizure during video game play provides a stark reminder of the potential physical dangers associated with electronic entertainment that uses flashing lights and rapid visual stimulation to create excitement and engagement. This medical emergency demonstrates how foreign entertainment products may not always comply with safety standards or consider health implications that could affect vulnerable individuals, particularly children whose developing nervous systems may be more susceptible to adverse reactions. The game's content, featuring scenarios that involve bombing Pearl Harbor and other military targets, reveals the underlying political messaging that has been embedded within what appears to be innocent children's entertainment. The normalization of violence against American military installations through repetitive gameplay demonstrates how cultural products can gradually desensitize young audiences to concepts and activities that should generate moral concern or patriotic resistance, rather than enthusiastic participation. The toy store clerk's private conversation with Emperor Hirohito reveals the coordinated nature of this cultural infiltration campaign and the way that commercial enterprises can serve as instruments of foreign policy and strategic influence. When governments understand how to exploit international trade relationships and cultural exchange for political purposes that extend beyond immediate economic benefits into longer-term strategic advantages. The meeting between American corporate representatives and Japanese government officials demonstrates how cultural infiltration operates through legitimate business channels and established trade relationships rather than covert intelligence operations, making detection and resistance more difficult for target populations who view commercial cultural exchange as benign economic activity rather than potential threats to national security or cultural independence. The Chinpokomon television program that begins airing on American networks provides additional opportunities for cultural messaging and psychological influence through storytelling that appears to be simple children's entertainment, while actually promoting specific values, attitudes, and behavioral patterns that serve the political and strategic interests of the foreign producers rather than the educational or developmental needs of American children who consume this content. The parents' initial tolerance and eventual concern about the growing Chinpokomon influence on their children reveals the difficulty that adults face in distinguishing between normal childhood enthusiasms and potentially harmful cultural influences that operate through sophisticated psychological manipulation and social pressure rather than obvious coercion or direct indoctrination that would trigger immediate protective responses from responsible caregivers. The announcement of Chinpokomon Camp represents the escalation of cultural infiltration from passive consumption of entertainment products to active participation in educational and social activities that provide foreign influences with direct access to American children for extended periods without parental supervision or oversight. The camp format allows for intensive indoctrination that would be impossible through commercial products alone. The rapid transformation of South Park Elementary students into Japanese-speaking, culturally converted participants in what amounts to a youth military organization demonstrates how quickly and thoroughly cultural infiltration can succeed when it operates through channels that children find appealing and rewarding. The adoption of Japanese language, customs, and behavioral patterns represents a complete cultural conversion that goes far beyond simple entertainment consumption. Miss Garrison's frustrated inability to communicate with her own students in their native language illustrates how cultural infiltration can disrupt fundamental educational and social relationships when foreign influences successfully replace domestic cultural patterns with alien systems of communication and behavior that create barriers between children and the adult authority figures who are responsible for their education and development. The town meeting, featuring Emperor Hirohito and the Shin-Pokémon Company executive, provides an opportunity for direct dialogue between American community leaders and the foreign influences that are reshaping their children's cultural identity and political loyalties. The Emperor's dismissive comments about American cultural and physical characteristics reveal the underlying contempt that motivates this infiltration campaign, rather than genuine desire for cultural exchange or mutual understanding. The crude sexual references and anatomical comparisons that punctuate these diplomatic exchanges demonstrate how cultural conflicts often devolve into personal attacks and primitive forms of competition that obscure the more serious political and strategic issues at stake in struggles over cultural influence and national identity. The focus on physical attributes rather than substantive policy discussions reveals the immature nature of much international discourse. The women of South Park's attempt to create competing American toys that might draw children's attention away from Japanese cultural products illustrates the challenge that domestic producers face when competing against foreign cultural infiltration that benefits from government support and strategic coordination, rather than operating purely through market mechanisms and commercial appeal to consumer preferences. The failure of American-produced alternatives to achieve the same level of appeal and cultural influence as the Japanese products reveals how cultural infiltration succeeds, not simply through superior quality or marketing, but through sophisticated understanding of child psychology and the exploitation of specific vulnerabilities in American family structure and educational systems that make children susceptible to foreign influence and manipulation. The transformation of South Park children into a marching military unit with coordinated uniforms and behavior patterns represents the ultimate success of cultural infiltration in converting American children into instruments of foreign political influence who might eventually be used against their own country's interests when they reach adulthood and assume positions of responsibility and authority within American society and government institutions. The parents' eventual recognition of the threat and their decision to adopt Shin-Pokémon enthusiasm themselves demonstrates how communities can resist cultural infiltration through strategic counter-adoption that transforms foreign cultural products from symbols of rebellion and independence into markers of adult approval and establishment conformity that naturally lose their appeal for children seeking to distinguish themselves from parental authority. The psychological mechanism that makes parental adoption of youth culture effective in neutralizing its appeal reveals important insights about how cultural movements gain and lose momentum based on their association with different PEL-ES demographic groups and social categories. The transformation of Shin-Pokémon from youth rebellion symbol to adult enthusiasm eliminates the social benefits that made it attractive to children in the first place. Kyle's philosophical resistance to abandoning Shin-Pokémon simply because his parents have embraced it demonstrates the complex psychological dynamics that can develop when individuals recognize the artificial nature of cultural movements while simultaneously feeling pressure to maintain consistency with their previous choices and investments. His concern about becoming just another follower reveals sophisticated thinking about individual agency and group conformity. The episode's resolution through the failure of the Pearl Harbor bombing plan due to the loss of American child participants provides a satisfying conclusion, while also suggesting that cultural infiltration campaigns ultimately depend on maintaining the enthusiasm and cooperation of their target populations, making them vulnerable to counter-strategies that undermine the psychological and social benefits that motivate participation in foreign-influenced cultural movements. The broader implications of the Chinpokomon episode extend beyond its immediate entertainment value to encompass serious questions about cultural sovereignty, the vulnerability of democratic societies to foreign influence through commercial channels, and the responsibility that parents and educators bear for monitoring and evaluating the cultural influences that shape children's development and political socialization during their most formative years. The episode's prescient examination of how foreign nations might exploit American consumer culture and entertainment preferences for strategic political purposes has become increasingly relevant in contemporary discussions about cultural influence, information warfare, and the ways that international conflicts now operate through cultural and economic channels rather than traditional military and diplomatic mechanisms that are more easily recognized and countered by established national security institutions. In the quiet reflection on this remarkable episode's insights into cultural infiltration and childhood vulnerability to foreign influence, we recognize that Chinpokomon represents more than satirical entertainment, but rather a serious examination of how democratic societies must balance openness to international cultural exchange with vigilance against sophisticated attempts to exploit that openness for strategic advantages that could ultimately undermine the cultural independence and political autonomy that democratic institutions require for their continued survival and effectiveness in protecting citizen welfare and national interests. In the intricate machinery of television production and distribution that governs what content reaches audiences and what material disappears into the archives of corporate caution, few phenomena reveal as much about the complex relationship between artistic expression and institutional control as the systematic censorship that has transformed South Park's banned episodes from accessible entertainment into forbidden cultural artifacts that exist primarily in the shadows of unofficial distribution and collector preservation efforts. This comprehensive examination of censorship mechanisms demonstrates how multiple layers of institutional pressure, from network standards departments to international distribution concerns, can effectively silence controversial content while maintaining the appearance of supporting free expression and artistic creativity. The evolution of Comedy Central's standards and practices regarding South Park content reveals how network policies adapt to changing cultural sensitivities, legal pressures, and commercial considerations, rather than maintaining consistent principles about artistic freedom or educational value that might guide content decisions based on objective criteria rather than subjective assessments of potential controversy or financial risk. The network's willingness to broadcast certain episodes during their original run, while subsequently removing them from rotation, demonstrates how retroactive censorship can operate through quiet policy changes rather than dramatic public pronouncements. The role of advertiser pressure in shaping content availability represents one of the most significant yet least visible forms of censorship in contemporary media, as companies that purchase advertising time can effectively control editorial decisions by threatening to withdraw financial support from programs that feature content they consider inconsistent with their brand image or customer expectations. This economic leverage allows corporate interests to influence cultural discourse without direct involvement in creative decisions or public accountability for censorship activities. The complex web of international distribution agreements and local content regulations creates additional layers of censorship that operate beyond domestic policy considerations to encompass global market access and revenue optimization. Strategies that may require content modification or complete elimination to maintain commercial viability in different cultural and political contexts. Networks must balance domestic artistic freedom against international commercial opportunities in ways that often prioritize financial considerations over creative integrity or cultural significance. Legal threats from organizations, countries, and individuals represent perhaps the most direct form of censorship pressure, as entertainment companies must evaluate the potential costs of defending controversial content against the guaranteed expenses of litigation, settlement negotiations, and public relations management that accompany legal challenges to satirical or critical material. The asymmetric nature of these legal battles favors wealthy plaintiffs who can afford prolonged litigation against media companies that must consider shareholder interests alongside artistic principles. The Church of Scientology's successful campaign against Trapped in the Closet demonstrates how determined organizations can use legal intimidation, public relations, pressure, and economic threats to effectively silence satirical commentary that exposes their practices or beliefs to critical examination. Their ability to force content removal through persistent legal challenges, rather than successful court victories, reveals how the threat of litigation can be more effective than actual legal proceedings in achieving censorship. Objectives: the Chinese government's comprehensive banning of South Park content and its pressure on American companies to modify or eliminate material that references Chinese political figures or policies illustrates how authoritarian regimes can extend their censorship authority beyond their territorial boundaries through economic leverage and market access control. The willingness of American entertainment companies to comply with foreign censorship demands demonstrates how global commercial considerations can override domestic free speech principles. The Catholic Church's successful pressure campaign against Bloody Mary reveals how religious organizations can mobilize their constituencies and institutional influence to force content removal, even in secular media environments that nominally operate independently of religious authority. The network's capitulation to religious pressure demonstrates how institutional censorship can operate through community organizing and cultural pressure rather than legal or regulatory mechanisms. The economics of controversy versus mainstream appeal create fundamental tensions within entertainment companies that must balance the publicity and cultural impact benefits of controversial content against the potential costs in terms of advertiser boycotts, legal challenges, and audience alienation that could affect long-term profitability and corporate stability. Networks must constantly evaluate whether controversial content generates sufficient viewer interest and cultural influence to justify the associated risks and expenses. DVD releases and uncensored versions for collectors represent one of the few remaining channels through which banned or heavily censored content can reach audiences willing to purchase physical media, specifically to access material that has been removed from regular distribution channels. These collector editions often include commentary tracks, behind-the-scenes materials, and contextual information that provide insight into the censorship process and the creative decisions that led to controversial content creation. Fan preservation efforts and bootleg distribution networks have become crucial mechanisms for maintaining access to culturally significant content that has been removed from official distribution channels due to censorship pressure or corporate policy changes. These informal preservation systems operate through file-sharing networks, private collectors, and dedicated fan communities that recognize the historical and cultural value of controversial material even when commercial distributors abandon it. The Streisand effect phenomenon demonstrates how censorship attempts can paradoxically increase public interest in and demand for restricted content, creating situations where banned material becomes more culturally significant and widely discussed than it would have been if left available through normal distribution channels. The forbidden nature of censored content can transform relatively obscure episodes or scenes into cultural touchstones that generate more attention and analysis than their original broadcast ever achieved. Academic and cultural preservation institutions face complex challenges in maintaining access to controversial media content that has been removed from commercial distribution, but retains significant value for research, education, and cultural analysis purposes. Universities, libraries, and research organizations must navigate copyright restrictions, institutional policies, and cultural sensitivities, while fulfilling their mission to preserve and provide access to culturally significant materials, regardless of their controversial nature. The balance between artistic freedom and corporate responsibility creates ongoing tensions within entertainment companies that must consider their obligations to shareholders, employees, advertisers, and audiences, while also maintaining some commitment to creative expression and cultural commentary that may occasionally conflict with purely commercial considerations. These competing loyalties often result in inconsistent policies and reactive decision-making rather than principled approaches to content evaluation and distribution. Streaming service content filtering and availability gaps represent a new frontier in content censorship, as digital platforms can easily remove or restrict access to specific episodes or scenes without the logistical challenges associated with physical media recall or broadcast schedule modifications. The ease of digital content manipulation allows for more precise and targeted censorship that can respond quickly to emerging controversies or pressure campaigns, while minimizing public awareness of content removal. The international distribution challenges that arise from content restrictions in different countries create complex logistical and financial problems for entertainment companies that must maintain separate versions of their content, libraries for different markets while managing the costs and administrative burden of multiple content configurations. These practical challenges often lead to lowest common denominator approaches that eliminate potentially controversial material rather than managing complex distribution schemes. The role of content rating systems and classification schemes in preemptive censorship demonstrates how institutional mechanisms designed to provide consumer information can evolve into tools for restricting access to controversial material through age restrictions, warning labels, and category assignments that effectively limit audience reach and commercial viability without explicitly banning content outright. Network self-censorship represents perhaps the most pervasive form of content restriction, as entertainment companies increasingly avoid producing controversial material rather than dealing with the predictable challenges and expenses associated with defending or distributing such content after its creation. This anticipatory censorship shapes creative decisions at the earliest stages of content development and may eliminate controversial topics from consideration before they reach the production phase. The relationship between censorship and cultural memory reveals how content restrictions can effectively erase controversial perspectives and uncomfortable truths from public discourse by making them inaccessible to new generations who might otherwise encounter and evaluate these materials as part of their cultural education and intellectual development. The disappearance of banned episodes from regular circulation can create gaps in cultural understanding that affect how historical events and social issues are remembered and analyzed. The technological solutions that enable both censorship and preservation demonstrate how digital media creates new possibilities for content control, while also providing tools for circumventing restrictions and maintaining access to controversial material through decentralized networks and informal distribution systems that operate beyond the control of traditional media gatekeepers and corporate distribution channels. The legal precedents established through censorship cases create frameworks that influence future content decisions and institutional policies regarding controversial material, as entertainment companies must consider how current legal developments might affect their exposure to litigation or regulatory action when evaluating whether to produce, distribute, or maintain access to potentially controversial content. The cultural impact measurement challenges associated with banned content create difficulties in assessing the true significance and influence of controversial episodes that may generate more discussion and analysis through their absence than they would have achieved through normal distribution channels. The underground status of censored material can enhance its cultural cache while making objective evaluation of its artistic merit and social impact more difficult. The generational differences in accessing and understanding banned content create cultural divides between viewers who experienced controversial episodes during their original broadcast and younger audiences who encounter these materials only through unofficial channels or secondhand accounts that may not preserve the original context and cultural significance that made them controversial in the first place. The preservation ethics that govern institutional decisions about maintaining access to controversial content force cultural organizations to balance their educational and historical missions against contemporary community standards and institutional policies that may conflict with preservation goals when controversial material generates ongoing criticism or legal challenges that threaten organizational stability and funding. In the gentle contemplation of these complex censorship mechanisms and their far-reaching effects on cultural discourse and historical preservation, we recognize that the machinery of content restriction represents more than simple institutional caution or commercial calculation, but rather a comprehensive system of cultural control that operates through multiple channels and influences to shape what perspectives and information remain available for public consideration and debate, ultimately affecting how democratic societies understand their own history and evaluate contemporary challenges through the lens of previously controversial but potentially valuable cultural commentary and artistic expression. In the profound transformation of cultural significance that occurs when controversial content becomes forbidden fruit, few phenomena demonstrate as clearly the paradoxical relationship between censorship and cultural impact as the mythological status that South Park's banned episodes have achieved within fan communities, academic circles, and broader cultural discourse about the limits of acceptable expression in democratic societies. These absent episodes have transcended their original function as entertainment to become symbols of artistic courage, institutional cowardice, and the ongoing struggle between creative freedom and the various forces that seek to constrain controversial expression through legal, economic, and social pressure. The role of banned episodes in South Park mythology extends far beyond their original content or entertainment value to encompass their function as markers of creative boundaries that have been crossed and subsequently defended, abandoned by institutional gatekeepers who must balance artistic integrity against commercial viability and legal safety. The episode's absence from regular distribution has transformed them into cultural artifacts that carry additional meaning derived from their forbidden status rather than simply their satirical content or comedic effectiveness. Fan community efforts to preserve and share restricted content represent a form of cultural resistance that operates through informal networks and underground distribution systems that maintain access to controversial material, despite official attempts to remove it from public circulation. These preservation activities demonstrate how dedicated audiences can circumvent institutional censorship through technological solutions and collective action that prioritizes cultural preservation over corporate policy compliance or legal risk avoidance. The development of specialized collector markets for original broadcasts and merchandise associated with banned episodes reveals how censorship can paradoxically increase the economic value of restricted content by creating artificial scarcity that transforms previously common cultural products into rare commodities sought after by collectors who recognize their historical significance and cultural importance beyond their immediate entertainment function. Academic study of censorship in contemporary animation has increasingly focused on South Park's banned episodes as case studies that illustrate broader patterns of institutional response to controversial content and the mechanisms through which satirical commentary can be effectively silenced. Without direct government intervention or explicit legal prohibition, these scholarly examinations treat the episodes as primary source material for understanding how democratic societies manage conflicts between free expression and competing social values. The episode's influence on later controversial animated content extends beyond direct imitation or homage to encompass the way that subsequent creators and producers approach potentially controversial topics with awareness of the risks and consequences that may follow from challenging sensitive subjects or powerful interests that possess the resources and motivation to pursue censorship through legal, economic, or cultural pressure campaigns. International differences in censorship standards and cultural values create complex patterns of availability and restriction that vary significantly between different countries and regions, with some banned episodes remaining accessible in certain markets, while being completely prohibited in others, based on local laws, cultural sensitivities, and political considerations that reflect different approaches to balancing free expression against social harmony and religious respect. The irony of episodes becoming more famous through restriction than they ever achieved through normal distribution demonstrates how censorship can function as a form of reverse marketing that generates public interest and cultural significance through controversy and forbidden status, rather than through conventional promotional activities or critical acclaim based on artistic merit or entertainment value alone. The educational value of studying what societies consider unacceptable provides crucial insight into cultural boundaries, political sensitivities, and the evolution of social norms regarding topics that range from religious representation to international relations to celebrity privacy rights. The specific content that triggers censorship responses reveals underlying anxieties and cultural fault lines that might otherwise remain hidden beneath surface claims of tolerance and openness to diverse perspectives. Cultural preservation institutions face ethical dilemmas when deciding whether to maintain access to controversial material that has been removed from commercial distribution, but retains significant value for research, education, and historical understanding of how satirical commentary operates within democratic discourse and how institutional responses to controversy reveal broader patterns of power and influence in media production and distribution. The long-term impact on Matt Stone and Trey Parker's creative approach reflects the way that censorship experiences can influence artistic development and risk assessment in subsequent creative projects, as creators must balance their commitment to controversial commentary against practical considerations about distribution, legal challenges, and the potential costs associated with producing content that may never reach its intended audience due to institutional restrictions. Other animated shows' responses to similar censorship challenges demonstrate how the South Park precedents have influenced industry-wide approaches to controversial content, with some creators becoming more cautious about potentially offensive material, while others have embraced controversial topics as a form of artistic identity and marketing strategy that distinguishes their content from more conventional entertainment offerings. The evolution of what's considered acceptable in mainstream media reveals how cultural standards shift over time in response to changing social values, political developments, and generational differences in attitude toward topics that were previously considered either acceptable or unacceptable for public discussion and satirical treatment in entertainment contexts. The technological solutions that enable both preservation and circumvention of censorship demonstrate how digital media creates new possibilities for maintaining access to controversial content through decentralized distribution networks that operate beyond the control of traditional gatekeepers, and corporate policy enforcement mechanisms that govern official distribution channels. The relationship between controversy and cultural memory illustrates how censorship can paradoxically ensure the long-term significance of controversial content by creating associations between restricted material and important cultural and political issues that transform entertainment into historical documentation of social conflicts and institutional responses to challenging artistic expression. The generational impact of banned episodes creates cultural divides between viewers who experience controversial content during its original broadcast and younger audiences who encounter these materials only through second-hand accounts, unofficial distribution, or academic analysis that may not preserve the original cultural context that made the content controversial or significant in the first place. The collector's market dynamics that develop around banned content reveal how artificial scarcity created by censorship can transform cultural products into investment commodities whose value derives more from their forbidden status than from their intrinsic artistic merit or entertainment value, creating economic incentives for preservation and underground distribution that operate independently of official cultural institutions. The role of banned episodes in broader cultural conversations about artistic freedom demonstrates how specific censorship cases can become symbolic of larger conflicts between creative expression and institutional control, with individual episodes serving as focal points for debates about democratic values, religious tolerance, international relations, and the appropriate limits of satirical commentary in pluralistic societies. The underground status and mythological quality that surrounds banned episodes creates a form of cultural mystique that may actually enhance their perceived importance and artistic significance beyond what they might have achieved through normal distribution and critical evaluation, as forbidden content often attracts more attention and generates more discussion than readily available material. The academic framework for analyzing censored content has developed sophisticated methodologies for studying controversial material while navigating institutional policies and cultural sensitivities that may conflict with scholarly investigation of topics that have been deemed inappropriate for mainstream distribution, but retain significant value for understanding cultural conflicts and artistic expression. The international perspective on American comedy export and its reception in different cultural contexts reveals how satirical content that seems acceptable within its original cultural framework can become deeply offensive or politically problematic when distributed to audiences with different religious, political, or cultural values and expectations about appropriate treatment of sensitive topics. The long-term cultural consequences of content removal include the creation of gaps in cultural understanding and historical documentation that affect how future generations understand the cultural conflicts and social tensions that characterize particular historical periods, as the absence of controversial material from official archives can distort historical understanding of how satirical commentary functioned in democratic discourse. The preservation efforts undertaken by dedicated fan communities represent a form of informal cultural curation that operates through collective action and shared commitment to maintaining access to controversial material, despite official attempts to restrict distribution, demonstrating how grassroots cultural preservation can function independently of institutional support or approval. The legal precedents established through various censorship cases create frameworks that influence future content decisions and institutional policies regarding controversial material, as entertainment companies and cultural institutions must consider how established legal principles might affect their exposure to litigation or regulatory action when evaluating whether to produce, distribute, or preserve potentially controversial content. The economic analysis of censorship costs and benefits reveals how institutional decisions about controversial content involve complex calculations that balance potential revenue loss from advertiser boycotts or audience alienation against Five Live. The cultural capital and publicity benefits that may result from association with controversial or critically acclaimed artistic expression that challenges conventional boundaries. In the gentle recognition of these complex cultural dynamics and their far-reaching implications for democratic discourse and artistic expression, we understand that banned episodes represent more than simply absent entertainment content, but rather important indicators of how societies negotiate conflicts between competing values, and how institutional responses to controversial expression can shape cultural memory and influence the boundaries of acceptable public discourse in ways that extend far beyond their immediate impact on specific creative works or entertainment properties. In the profound philosophical terrain where humor intersects with moral responsibility and satirical commentary encounters the boundaries of acceptable discourse, few questions provoke as much intellectual complexity and ethical uncertainty as those surrounding the nature of forbidden humor and its role in democratic societies that claim to value both free expression and respectful treatment of diverse communities with fundamentally different beliefs about what constitutes legitimate targets for comedic commentary. The examination of South Park's banned episodes through this philosophical lens reveals deep tensions between competing conceptions of comedy's purpose, satirical commentary's social function, and the responsibility that creators bear for the consequences of their artistic choices when those choices address sensitive, cultural, religious, and political topics. The fundamental distinction between comedy and commentary in banned episodes operates at the intersection of entertainment and education, where satirical content serves multiple functions simultaneously, as both source of amusement and vehicle for social criticism that may challenge established beliefs, institutional authority, and cultural assumptions in ways that pure entertainment typically avoids. This dual function creates interpretive challenges for audiences who must determine whether particular content should be evaluated primarily as artistic expression designed for entertainment purposes, or as substantive commentary that makes claims about reality and advocates for particular perspectives on controversial issues. The ethical questions surrounding satirical treatment of religious figures and beliefs reveal fundamental tensions between secular approaches to cultural criticism that treat all belief systems as legitimate targets for satirical, commentary, and religious perspectives that regard certain figures, doctrines, and practices as sacred and therefore inappropriate subjects for humorous treatment, regardless of artistic intent or educational value that might result from such commentary. The responsibility of satirists in addressing sensitive cultural topics extends beyond simple legal obligations to avoid defamation or incitement to encompass more complex moral questions about the consequences of satirical commentary for vulnerable communities, interfaith relations, and social cohesion in pluralistic societies, where different groups maintain incompatible beliefs about appropriate treatment of sacred symbols and religious authority figures. The therapeutic and social value of controversial comedy emerges through its capacity to address difficult topics through humor that can make challenging subjects more accessible to audiences who might otherwise avoid serious discussion of contentious issues, while simultaneously creating opportunities for cathartic release of social tensions and anxieties that might otherwise manifest in more destructive forms of conflict and community division. The distinction between punching up and punching down in satirical commentary reflects important ethical principles about the appropriate targets for humor and social criticism, with punching up referring to satirical attacks on powerful individuals and institutions that possess resources to defend themselves, while punching down involves targeting vulnerable individuals or marginalized communities who lack the power to respond effectively or protect themselves from harmful stereotyping and public ridicule. International perspectives on American comedy export reveal significant cultural differences in humor traditions, satirical conventions, and social boundaries regarding acceptable targets for comedic treatment that reflect different historical experiences, religious traditions, and political systems that shape what different societies consider appropriate subjects for public humor and satirical commentary. The role of context and intent in interpreting satirical content creates complex hermeneutical challenges that require audiences to consider not only the explicit content of comedic material, but also the cultural context within which it was created, the stated intentions of its creators, and the broader social and political environment that influences how particular satirical commentary might be received and interpreted by different audience segments with varying cultural backgrounds and sensitivity levels. The impact of censorship on the marketplace of ideas and public discourse demonstrates how restrictions on controversial comedy can limit the range of perspectives and topics available for public consideration and debate, potentially impoverishing democratic discourse by eliminating satirical voices that might challenge conventional wisdom, expose institutional hypocrisy, or provide alternative perspectives on complex social and political issues that require diverse viewpoints for adequate understanding. The courage required to create genuinely challenging content involves not only artistic risk-taking and creative innovation, but also willingness to accept personal and professional consequences that may result from producing satirical commentary that offends powerful interests or violates cultural taboos that are enforced through social pressure, legal challenges, and economic retaliation, rather than explicit government censorship. The balance between respect and honesty in cultural criticism requires satirical commentators to navigate carefully between acknowledging the legitimate concerns and sensitivities of different communities while maintaining their commitment to honest evaluation and critical examination of beliefs, practices, and institutions that may deserve satirical treatment despite their sacred or sensitive status within particular cultural contexts. The long-term cultural value of preserving uncomfortable truths through satirical commentary extends beyond immediate entertainment value to encompass the historical record of social tensions, cultural conflicts, and institutional responses to criticism that provide valuable insight for future generations, seeking to understand how democratic societies managed controversial issues and competing values during particular historical periods. The philosophical frameworks that govern satirical commentary draw from diverse intellectual traditions, including liberal theories of free expression, utilitarian calculations of social benefit and harm, deontological principles about moral duties and rights, and virtue ethics approaches that focus on the character and intentions of satirical commentators, rather than simply the consequences of their creative choices. The relationship between humor and truth reveals complex epistemological questions about how satirical commentary can illuminate aspects of reality that might otherwise remain hidden or unexamined, while also acknowledging that humor's effectiveness often depends on exaggeration, distortion, and selective emphasis that may compromise its reliability as a source of accurate information about the topics it addresses. The social contract implications of satirical freedom involve implicit agreements between comedic creators and their audiences about acceptable boundaries, shared assumptions, and mutual responsibilities that govern how satirical content should be created, distributed, and interpreted within particular cultural contexts that may change over time in response to evolving social values and political developments. The psychological mechanisms through which controversial humor operates include its capacity to reduce social tensions through cathartic release, challenge authority through ridicule and exposure, build community solidarity through shared laughter at common targets, and process difficult emotions through comedic distance that makes painful or frightening topics more psychologically manageable for both creators and audiences. The institutional frameworks that support or constrain satirical expression include legal systems that protect free speech while defining limits on harmful expression, cultural institutions that preserve and distribute satirical content while navigating community sensitivities, and economic systems that reward or punish controversial commentary through market mechanisms and consumer choice rather than direct censorship. The global perspective on satirical boundaries reveals how different societies have developed varying approaches to managing conflicts between free expression and social harmony, with some cultures maintaining stronger taboos around religious humor, while others place greater emphasis on political satire as essential to democratic accountability and institutional criticism. The educational applications of controversial satirical content in academic contexts create opportunities for examining cultural conflicts, media literacy, and ethical reasoning, while also presenting challenges related to institutional policies, student sensitivities, and community expectations about appropriate educational content that may conflict with scholarly values of open inquiry and critical examination. The technological impact of digital distribution on satirical content has transformed both the reach and vulnerability of controversial comedy, enabling global distribution and preservation, while also creating new opportunities for censorship through platform policies, algorithmic suppression, and targeted harassment campaigns that can effectively silence satirical voices without formal legal prohibition. The evolutionary perspective on humor and social criticism suggests that satirical commentary serves important adaptive functions in human societies by enabling challenges to authority, exposure of hypocrisy, and processing of social change through comedic frameworks that can facilitate cultural adaptation and conflict resolution without resort to more destructive forms of social competition and community division. The moral psychology research on humor and offense reveals complex cognitive and emotional processes that influence how individuals respond to satirical content, including factors such as personal investment in targeted beliefs, group identification, perceived intent of satirical commentators, and cultural background that shapes expectations about appropriate humor and acceptable social criticism. The democratic theory implications of satirical freedom encompass its role as a form of political participation, institutional accountability mechanism, and cultural safety valve that enables peaceful expression of dissent and criticism that might otherwise manifest in more disruptive or destructive forms of political opposition and social conflict within democratic systems that depend on open debate and peaceful conflict resolution. In the quiet contemplation of these profound philosophical questions surrounding the nature and value of forbidden humor, we recognize that the examination of controversial satirical content ultimately reveals fundamental tensions within democratic societies about how to balance competing values of free expression, community respect, individual dignity, and social cohesion that cannot be resolved through simple formulas or universal principles, but require ongoing negotiation, cultural dialogue, and institutional adaptation that reflects the evolving understanding of how satirical commentary can serve both individual artistic expression and broader social purposes, while minimizing harm to vulnerable communities and maintaining the Pachin democratic discourse that depends on the continued availability of diverse perspectives and challenging voices. As our journey through South Park's forbidden archives draws to a peaceful close, we find ourselves enriched by the complex wisdom hidden within these controversial episodes. These banned stories remind us that sometimes the most important conversations emerge from the most uncomfortable places, that the boundaries of acceptable discourse are constantly shifting, and that true artistic courage often comes with significant costs. In their absence from regular rotation, these episodes have become more powerful, their messages amplified by the very censorship meant to silence them. They teach us that comedy at its best doesn't just entertain but challenges, provokes, and forces us to examine our own beliefs and biases. As you drift off to sleep, remember that somewhere in the digital archives and collectors' vaults, these forbidden tales continue to exist, waiting to spark conversations about freedom, responsibility, and the price of pushing boundaries. Rest peacefully, knowing that even in a world of increasing sensitivity, there remain voices willing to ask the difficult questions and tell the uncomfortable truths that help us grow as a society.